Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
I've learned a lot since I first began researching Lisa Marie Young's disappearance. I've spoken with hundreds of people, and every time I do so, I feel like I'm getting a little closer to knowing what happened the night Lisa vanished.
Lisa was going out with her friends for somebody's birthday, and she came over, and I was watching a hockey game or something. Her and I were really close, so she hung out for a while, and we had a beer, and she said, okay, I'm going out with my friends, and that was about it.
Sure enough, it's Lisa on her cell phone. I call her back. She goes, Dallas, I don't know what's going on. This guy won't bring me back. We're sitting in a driveway on Bowen Road, and he won't bring me back. We're just sitting here. She's like, I'm bored. I'm getting pissed off.
And to understanding why her case has yet to be solved.
Where is Lisa? Where is
Police weren't doing any searches at the time. It was our nation, Clayoquot First Nations, that put a team of guys together to do searches for Lisa.
In this episode, you'll hear the perspective of a retired RCMP officer, a detective who was working on Lisa's case almost from the beginning. I'm Laura Palmer, and this is Island Crime, an update to Season 1, Where is Lisa? This is Episode 15, Cold. I'm meeting former RCMP Major Crime Detective Doug Hogg at the Starbucks here in Port Alberni. It's a hot summer's day. I'm waiting outside, reviewing some questions I've prepared and hoping I can recognize Doug by a picture I've seen online. He walks right past me into the coffee shop. He's dressed in a casual shirt and shorts. Like many of the retired police officers of his generation that I've met, he's surprisingly young, healthy, tanned, and fit. Just as I'm gathering my gear to head back into the coffee shop, he pops back out with a drink and a muffin and walks straight for my table. We'd clocked each other. I introduce myself and thank him for making the drive to Port Alberni. We both want this interview to be in person, but it's hard for me to leave town right now. My elderly mum lives with us, and she hasn't been well. So Doug makes the drive across the island to meet with me. Outside the coffee shop is just too noisy. The parking lot is busy, and of course, the tourist traffic streaming down the Alberni Highway towards Tofino is heavy all summer long. So Doug agrees to sit in my small studio on wheels, my Honda. I've cleaned up the Honda, knowing this might happen. But it still smells a little of wet dog. My giant golden retriever, Bernese Mountain Dog Bear, has been in the lake a lot recently.
Okay, so my name's Doug Hogg, a retired member of the RCMP. I joined in 1981 and retired in 2011.
He tells me the majority of his career was in Nanaimo. He begins in general duty, then property crimes and fraud. But eventually, he lands his dream job.
I've always wanted to be in plain clothes. Even when I was a little kid, I always wanted to be in kind of a detective, if you will. I told my dad that's what I was going to do when he asked me. He was a dyed-in-the-wool traffic guy, and I said, no, I'm going to be in GIS, which is General Investigation Section. And at one time, I actually was in charge of the major crime section there. I kind of rose through the ranks.
In the summer of 2002, the summer Lisa Marie Young vanishes from Nanaimo, Doug is working in what is then called serious crimes.
Well, when this case came up, I remember that we had just come back from sort of a major deployment. I believe it was the G8 summit in Calgary. A lot of people were away at that time, and I think that may have been why Lisa's case didn't get acted upon right away, as it may have just sat.
The G8 summit is held in Kananaskis, just south of Calgary, Alberta, on June 26th to 27th, 2002. Jean Chrétien is Canada's Prime Minister. George W. Bush is President of the USA. The UK's Tony Blair attends, as does a young Russian leader, Vladimir Putin. The security would have been high, and hearing about that drawdown on Nanaimo's RCMP resources is important context. It may help explain why Lisa's disappearance isn't taken as seriously as it should have been at the outset.
I mean, I'll admit it probably didn't get handled the best way it should have at the beginning, but eventually it made its way it came to us, and I remember myself and Sora Group were working on it, and we put a lot of effort into trying to find Lisa. We were still hopeful at the time that she was around, and a lot of missing persons cases, you find out that, that somebody's gone off and hanging out with a new boyfriend, or sometimes they just don't even want to be found, right? They just want to start a new life, if you will. So we were kind of hoping that maybe that was what was the case with Lisa.
The other detective Doug mentions here is Saurabh Rupa. Rupa will also go on to have a distinguished career with the RCMP. At one point, he's an assistant commissioner, one of the very top positions for a Mountie in Canada. Doug doesn't have his notes from back then, so he's going by memory, now 22 years after the fact. He believes Lisa has been missing for at least 3 days by the time he and his unit take over the file. He recalls the urgency in the voices of Lisa's parents, Don and Joanne. Here's how Doug remembers those early days he had on Lisa's case.
Basically what we had to do is recreate that last evening, repiece that whole evening together through people that she was with. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember how it all came together, but there was, like I say, 2 people would go and interview this person that she was with that night, and then 2 people would go interview that person, and 2 people would go interview this person, get together, have a bit of a briefing, sort it all out. Who do we go interview next? Establish some priorities as to who's more important. Through that process, Dallas Hulley was the guy that we needed to talk to.
So tell me about that, because Dallas unfortunately died just before I started working on this case. Right. I started working on this about 5 years ago. He died before that.
Yes.
What do you recall about your conversations with him back then?
I remember, I think we went to his mom's house. We didn't even knock on the door. We met somebody in the yard. That's what it was. I can't remember who that person was, but yeah, just a second, I'll go get him. I remember talking to Sarv about it afterwards. We both expected Dallas and Lisa to come bounding out of that house, and he came out by himself. We knew that, this isn't good.
A reminder here. Dallas Hulley was Lisa's friend. Lisa has gone out with Dallas and others on the night she vanished to celebrate Dallas's birthday.
He was really cooperative and really straightforward, and you could tell from his demeanor when we told him what was going on, he was really concerned too. I mean, really concerned. He came back to the detachment and gave us a statement, and a really good statement, a really good detailed statement. And through that process, we learned that, we had to track down another individual.
The other individual is Christopher William Adair. In my research on this case, it's been suggested to me that perhaps Dallas knew Chris before that night. But Doug tells me that was not his thought at the time.
No, because he really wasn't able to provide a lot of details about Chris. He was able to provide a lot of other details about other events that had happened that night, as like who else was with them. So I don't think he knew Chris. I think they just bumped into one another. The attraction of the draw was, or the reason they met, was the car, the Jaguar. You don't see too many Jags on Skinner Street in Nanaimo at 2 a.m. So that was what sort of initiated their meeting or their contact. Dallas, I thought, was being straight up, forthright, very concerned about what was going on.
One of the young guys I talked to who was there that night, It was his impression that Dallas, that he and Lisa that night were very affectionate. It was his birthday, and maybe there was the potential for a romantic relationship. Did Dallas talk about that, or?
I remember, when we were discussing the interview afterwards, we certainly thought that he was very attracted to her that night, and was hoping that maybe the relationship would go further, I think. Unfortunately that didn't happen.
Was Dallas ever a suspect?
No. Not in my mind, no. No, I think, again, from his demeanor that night, the information he provided, we thought we were on the right track, and he was never a suspect in my mind. We certainly didn't treat him as such. When we interviewed him, we just interviewed as a witness and not a suspect.
What did he say, or how did he explain that neither he or any of Lisa's other friends went to help her when she called? What did they say about that?
They provided an explanation. Dallas provided an explanation. And because we talked earlier about, there's a lot of information the police have that we're kind of going into that area there now. So what I will say is that Dallas provided an explanation and some evidence, and that we were able to corroborate that, and that we believe that he was being truthful with us in that respect.
What his friend told me was that they were drunk and they made a bad decision, basically.
Well, I think that enters into it as well. I think maybe Dallas had some romantic inclinations toward Lisa that night, and when that wasn't going to materialize for him, he may have turned his attention elsewhere. There's that. I don't know that that's for sure what happened, but that may have been what happened. But certainly alcohol was involved as well. The driver of that Jag didn't present as a threat. Like you wouldn't see him as a threatening individual. Mm-hmm. So that might have had something to do with it as well, right? So, he's a young guy, he's well dressed, he's kind of preppy as they described him to us, and you wouldn't really think him as being sinister, you know what I mean?
So at that point, he's, the look of the car, that it's a Jag, and you've got this preppy guy. How long does it take for you to figure out who he is?
Not very long, because there was another police officer that was down there that night that recognized him.
Oh, okay.
And so we had about 3 or 4 different avenues of investigation going on in an effort to identify that individual, and kind of all 3 of them, the other police officer, the other 2 investigations, we were trying to track it down through a partial license plate, through ICBC registrations, and I can't remember what the other one was, but I remember literally within seconds of one another, all 3 people coming into the office going, I know who that is, I got it. Mm-hmm. And that's how the driver of the Jag was identified. Mm-hmm. And I believe that was the next day after we spoke to Dallas.
Okay, so that's quite early on then. Within,
I guess, again, I don't have the benefit of my notebook here, but it's probably 2 or 3 days after serious crime got the file. I think it was very quick.
So, according to retired RCMP detective Doug Hogg, the red Jag and its driver are identified soon after Serious Crimes takes over the file that first week of July. The driver, Christopher William Adair. Please keep in mind as you listen that Christopher Adair has never been charged in connection with Lisa Marie Young's disappearance. No one has. And so, what happens next then?
We went and got the car.
What does that look like? Because it was his grandmother's car.
It was his grandmother's car, yeah. That's the next logical step, is go grab the car and get a warrant and go through it and do all that kind of CSI stuff with it.
So it's my understanding that Chris at the time was, and maybe just for a short time, was living with his grandmother at that Hoy Lake property.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
strategy at the time was we're not really going to worry about interviewing him. He was interviewed at length shortly after that. He may have been interviewed very, very briefly at the time as to what happened, and I can't remember what his explanation was. It was very vague and not a lot of detail in it. I dropped her off or something, I think was what the explanation was. And I never saw her after that.
What Lisa tells her friends is that after they go to the subway, she is taken somewhere on Bowen Road to a place she says she doesn't want to be, and she wants to go back to where her friends are, and that Chris isn't.
And I think Dallas says, well, put him on the phone and let me talk to him, and he says, bring her back right now, and there was a bit of an argument, I guess, over the phone, and I remember that coming out. His explanation was that she was dropped right there where she was when she made that call.
Because I think at some point there's a suggestion that she has called a cab, or that she's going to take a cab somehow.
I can't remember if Chris said that or she mentioned that in the course of a phone call, the phone call back to Dallas and that crew. But I do remember mention of a cab, because we did go to the cab companies and say, did you pick up anybody at that particular location or in the vicinity about this time on that day? And there was no fares.
No. Because her dad, I think, had said, because he worried about her getting into cars with other people, her dad had said that he had an account for her.
That's right. And I think that also too, she was pretty familiar with a lot of the drivers. Like she knew a lot of the drivers in Nanaimo, and I remember Dad saying that the account, and she was a well-known customer, if you will, and so there was
nothing.
I'd assumed police had taken that step of checking out whether Lisa had taken a cab that night. But it's helpful to know this was the outcome of those inquiries. Next, police seize the red Jag. I've been to Jerry Adair's former Hoy Lake property in Qualicum Beach. It's lovely. Just a few blocks up from the ocean. The home was built in 1990 and has pretty manicured lawns and landscaping out front. It backs onto a forested area with a trail and an old railway line. Here's what Doug says happened the day the police show up at Jerry Adair's home to seize her red Jag. The car her grandson Chris was driving when he was last seen with Lisa in his vehicle the night she vanishes.
Grandma was having a garden party in the yard, and the police show up, and they want the car, and they want to talk to Chris. And this is just, in her mind, she didn't really care about why the police were there, or the urgency or the gravity of the situation. She was more concerned with the fact that her garden party was being so rudely interrupted. And so there was that. But the members went and did their job and did what they had to do that night. And she wasn't happy about it, but hey, small potatoes compared to what we're investigating, right?
Right. So the car is taken in. Again, and this is part of the storytelling that happens around this case, that the car has already been cleaned.
Right.
Is that your recollection?
Yeah, he certainly had an opportunity to do that.
This is something I've wondered about over the years. If police had seized the car the day after Lisa's disappearance, would things have turned out differently?
Certainly DNA would have been in the mind of the forensic people that went through the car. But say we did find a hair or a fingerprint or something, that really doesn't provide you anything evidentiary, because he admits to having her in the car. Right. I mean, Dallas and the crew that they were with that night says she was in the car. So there's evidence that she was in the car. And we already know that. So evidence to that extent is, really inconsequential, if I can use that word. But
right.
I mean, we went and looked because you don't know what you're going to find until you do look. So if there was evidence, say, of something more sinister, like a huge blood stain or a bullet hole, or a slash in the headliner of the car or something, some evidence of a struggle, or say a broken window, or he certainly isn't going to have time to fix that. And in the case of a massive amount of blood in a car, like, you can clean and clean and clean, and I'm quite confident that the forensics people, they'll find it. So there was no evidence of that nature found. I mean, there was evidence of DNA and that sort of thing found, but it doesn't really prove anything. It already proves what we know.
Next, police bring suspect Christopher William Adair in for an interrogation. When police bring Chris in for his interrogation, Doug says they want to ensure they're following all the right procedures.
He is treated as a suspect, and he is given the opportunity to contact counsel and all that. That's all done. That's all done by the books. The other thing I can tell you was that he was under arrest for another unrelated charge.
Because Chris is under arrest on another charge, Doug and his team have 24 hours. I've outlined some of Christopher Adair's criminal record in earlier episodes of Where is Lisa? His charges range from fraud and theft to assaults, including an assault on a peace officer. In episode 11 of Where is Lisa?, an Edmonton police officer described his arrest of Christopher Adair for assaulting his girlfriend at the time. Chris pled guilty in that case.
Yeah, and so we had one kick at the can. We went into his background as much as we could with the information that was available to us. There was a lot of research done, and a very, very experienced interrogator brought in. Lisa's mom was brought in. I think you already know this. Mom's to make a personal appeal. While this is all going on, we're trying to think of other people that we can make, have them come and make an appearance. And there was a former girlfriend of Chris's that we identified. And we tracked her down. And we actually, she was in Vancouver. The Force helicopter went over and picked her up, flew her over to the island. She came and did what we asked of her to do to make the appeal, and we flew her back.
I've reached out to this former girlfriend, but they have declined my invitation to speak with me about their role in all of this.
In my view, we were taking, we got one kick at the can, let's give her all we got, and let's do what we can do, and don't say it can't be done, because we'll figure out a way to do it. Let's just do it. And I've watched certain parts of that interview after the fact, and I can't watch them anymore. I couldn't watch it. It's when Lisa's mom makes the appeal, and I'm even getting emotional about it now. And it just made me more determined to find her. It's one of the most difficult things I've ever had to watch.
Joanne, like Dallas, passed away before I could speak with her. But I've talked to her sister and her mom and her husband, of course. What they relay from that moment is that he says something like, "I'm sorry, I don't mean to disrespect your family, but I can't tell you anything," or something along those lines.
Yeah. My lawyer said not to say anything.
Right. So he doesn't reveal anything more at that point.
No, he doesn't.
And so, in terms of, you mentioned it was a lengthy.
Well, we'll call it what it was. It was an interrogation.
Interrogation, yeah. What's he like? What's his demeanor? I suppose. What's he?
Cold. Cold. Just. That's part of the reason that makes it so hard to watch. He's so, I don't know what the right psychological term would be, narcissistic, whatever, but he's not going to do anything unless there's something in it for him. To make any evidence that you get admissible from an interrogation, You can't have any inducements or threats or promises, right? So you can't do anything to say, hey, Chris, things will go easy for you if you just tell us the truth, right? You got to be very careful of what you say to this individual in the course of an interrogation, because ultimately what you want is for it to be admissible in court.
Did you ever get the sense he was fearful or protecting anybody else? Or
No, he's just, it's all about him. The only person he's protecting is himself.
In the past few years, I've interviewed a number of women who knew him, and a police officer out of Edmonton who arrested him at some point. And they talked also about how charming he could be. Is there any of that when you guys are talking to him?
No, he's not. I wouldn't describe him as charming. I would describe him as calm, cool, very confident. That, but I wouldn't describe him as charming.
Doug is the first person I've spoken with who's actually seen this interrogation and been able to describe what happened. But he's being careful. He tells me he wishes he could say more, but feels obligated to the investigation and doesn't want to say anything that could jeopardize any success down the road.
What happens after that? You're left with, it sounds like very little from that interview
That's
with
right.
him.
We even sort of at the end decided, well, let's just try and get the body back, right? Let's just, for the parents, let's just try and get the body back. And that didn't go anywhere either.
The interrogation hasn't yielded the results they'd hoped for. The police need to find Lisa.
Where do you start? I mean, we did look at certain things that we knew about evidence, the timeline. We did actually physically go search areas, but without success.
And were those searches, like I read in some old newspaper stories, specific areas that were searched. Was there any particular reason, or was it just that timeline that you...
Well, certain movements that we're kind of on that edge of the area that I know about, but certain information, certain evidence that we had led us to certain areas, and based on a timeline of that night, we went and searched those areas.
Does any of that relate to her phone?
Yes.
Doug tells me nothing is ever found on those early searches. I've been out on a few recent searches for Lisa, and I can appreciate just how difficult it is to look for a body here on the island. The forests, the rock, the dense underbrush, and of course, the ocean and rivers.
After that night, it was 2 or 3 days. He had that car when he was alone till his grandmother returned from wherever she was. She was out of town at the time. Where can you go in 2 or 3 days in a Jaguar in Vancouver Island? Go a lot of places. So it's a needle in a haystack, really.
That's exactly how her father described it as well. Because in some ways it feels incredible that she still hasn't been found, and in other ways it doesn't at all. Because Vancouver Island, as you said,
it's a big place.
It is a big place.
The only thing that I'm going to say, which sort of would help you narrow it down a little bit, is it's a Jag. So you can't take a Jag up four-wheeling in the bush. So that's going to limit your search area, but you can cover a lot of territory.
If you've followed this series over the years, you'll know I've had many tips about where Lisa Marie Young's body might be. A couple of people have told me they believe she was taken off the island. But Doug doesn't think that's likely. In the wake of the interrogation, Doug tells me the RCMP go to great lengths to move the investigation forward, hampered at times by the fact that Chris is in custody out of province.
We had certain ideas that we wanted to try, and it took a long time for some of them to be tried because Chris was in jail. He was in custody out of province. So, when he's in custody, it's pretty hard for the police to do anything other than go talk to him, and we've already tried that without success.
Right.
He's certainly not going to say anything to the police while he's in an institution. So the whole thing was kind of put on hold, right?
Doug and his colleagues are trying to push forward the investigation with a focus on Christopher William Adair, the man Lisa is last known to be with on the night she vanishes. But during that time, rumors begin to swirl.
While we're working on that file as much as we can, despite him being in custody, all these rumors start to circulate, and we have to investigate them. Because if you did get to court and you had all these, we called them tips, all these tips that hadn't been followed through to conclusion, well, it would be easy for the defense to say, well, you never did that, you never did this, how come you didn't go talk to this person, you never followed that tip through, you never followed this tip through. If you had, maybe you would have found the real person, not my client, sort of thing, right? So you have to go through it and follow everyone, and a lot of it was just, rumor. Nothing definitive came out of it. There was, always, I heard that somebody saw this, or I heard that somebody said that. Psychic tips out like you wouldn't believe. We had a psychic tip that we followed up on, and myself and Sorab, and we went and interviewed this person, and she pointed it to an area that was eventually searched. It wasn't searched that night because it was an underwater area right off the Duke Point ferry terminal. So, but it was also bathtub weekend, and I remember Sorab and I were later on, we were on some duties related to bathtub days. We're down on the dock, and there's a boat named the Lisa Marie tied up at the dock.
Oh my God, weird.
Yeah, it was just kind of, I did a double take for sure.
I'll jump in here with a little local explainer. Lisa Marie Young's hometown of Nanaimo is the self-proclaimed bathtub capital of the world. The community held its first bathtub race in 1967 to mark Canada's 100th anniversary. And it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Folks make boats out of bathtubs, and they race them. There's a parade, concerts, a whole weekend of fun. In 2002, the festival kicks off on July 25th, more than 3 weeks after Lisa has vanished. It must have felt pretty surreal to be searching for Lisa amidst the lighthearted family festival, and to see a boat bobbing in the water with Lisa Marie's name. As the weeks go by with no sign of Lisa Marie Young and no arrests, there are flat-out rumors and psychic tips, neither of which are unusual. And then a specific story begins to take hold. A story of a snuff film gone horribly wrong, and a conspiracy of silence involving known Nanaimo criminals, including William Curry, who you heard from earlier in the series. When I spoke with Willie Curry, he described taking a polygraph in an attempt to prove his innocence back then. Here's what that looked like from Doug's perspective.
I was there when he took the polygraph
Oh,
test.
you were?
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me about that.
The most specific thing I remember about it is afterwards, I said, Willie, we're quite confident you had nothing to do with this. He jumped up and gave me the biggest hug that I've ever gotten. I thought he was going to kill me there for a second. I also thought, well, this is kind of weird. Like, you've been going around bragging about this, and I've already, you and I both know before we even walked into this room that you didn't really have anything to do with this. So why are you suddenly so elated about being cleared about this? It didn't quite compute, unless maybe he thought that we were going to come out, we as the police would charge him for this, but we weren't anywhere near any of that. So near that point. So yeah, I guess maybe just the fact that we, the police, knew that he didn't have anything to do about it must have been what triggered the hug. Yeah. So
when I interviewed him, he said, he of course denied having anything to do with it, but he did say him and a guy named Jimmy Vu went looking for Lisa, driving back roads and finding items of clothing and bringing them to the police. And he said he went and spoke with Chris Adair's grandmother and actually tried, I think he described it as a little bit of, he tried to romance her into talking to him. And it just all seemed incredibly odd to me for someone who
Wow.
didn't know her, he says. Like, what do you make of that behavior?
Well, I immediately just got a question of it. Did it even really ever happen? Where he's been prone to bullshit about a lot of things to make himself look good over the years, so he may have done it, but if I was a betting man, I'd say it never happened.
I talked to 2 other guys in the series who were like drug dealers, and that, you know, they both believe that a movie was being made that night, and that somehow Lisa becomes a victim in that context.
Okay, well, show me the video. If it's out there, where is it? Everybody said that so-and-so had the video.
Yeah.
But when you go talk to them, it's, oh, I didn't have it, it was this guy had it. And so, I mean, we did go looking for the snuff film, but anybody that we talked to that supposedly had knowledge about it wasn't able to produce it for us. So, and given with what Dallas and everybody else says that was with her, that were, you know, almost right to the very end, there's no evidence of the movie being made. And in the conversation that she has with Dallas on the phone, no conversation about a movie or anything like that. So I think, you know, given all that, that's just more BS that's floating around out there.
For the past 5 years, I've tried to get to the bottom of these rumors, to find anyone who has specific, first-hand knowledge of the alleged snuff film or of Willie Curry's involvement. There's no shortage of hearsay, but there's nothing I consider solid evidence. Doug has his own theory on why this particular rumor has had so much staying power down the years.
Well, I think it got a lot of public attention, as it should have when it first happened. Mr. Curry there was probably out bragging about having some responsibility in order to further his own criminal gains. I think there's that. Probably out there throwing more crap around. I don't know what her motive would be, but certainly maybe she was just repeating what Willie had told her. I don't know, but I think it's just people being selfish and trying to use this for their own personal gain in the criminal world. Take credit for something that they didn't do, but, you know, makes them look like the tough person or somebody who's in the know or somebody who's well placed in that criminal element. And they're just they're making it worse for everybody.
To be clear, this is not what I was told by Willie Curry when I asked him about the rumor. He thinks someone he knows made up the story as payback for a perceived wrong. What both Willie Curry and retired police detective Doug Hogg do agree on is the rumor about the snuff film is BS. In fact, that's the word they both use when they're speaking with me about it. You might also remember a woman who is alleged to be involved in the incident the night the snuff film is being made. In the rumor, this woman is referred to as the cleanup girl. Now, I've requested an interview with her. I do know her name, but I've never heard back. At the beginning of my interview with Doug, he mentions that he thought the case was not handled well at the beginning. So I ask him if this has anything to do with Lisa's Indigenous background.
She was a missing person. She was a missing girl. Her ethnicity never, ever entered into it. I mean, she's just that. She's a missing girl, and we're the police, and it's our responsibility to find her and bring those responsible to justice. And we cared a lot. And the thing is, we're all parents. We're all parents, and if our kid was missing, you know, I can't imagine what parents go through, but there was empathy towards that situation and try and find this girl. Let's find her now. Like I said, it probably wasn't handled the best way. It could have been handled right in the very outset, but it did get treated as seriously as it should have. Well, you know, when it came to our office, for sure. And yeah, so her ethnicity never ever entered into that. That's just, it kind of makes my blood boil to hear that, you know, because that was never a case. Never the case.
Some context here. I received a similar response to this question when I interviewed the current RCMP investigator on Lisa's file. But Lisa's Indigenous family have told me they do believe that Lisa being Indigenous was a factor in how her disappearance was handled at the outset. And that's the thing about unconscious or systemic bias. It's baked in, invisible. How you perceive a situation is informed by your lived experience. The other thing Doug wants to address is a perception that the police have botched Lisa's investigation.
I'm tired of them saying the police, you know, dropped the ball or mishandled the case or whatever. Like I said, initially, I think it could have been handled better.
What do you mean when you say that? Like what exactly?
If you're a policeman in any large detachment like Nanaimo, you get missing persons complaints all the time. Usually it's, yeah, my kid went out last night and hasn't come home. Or somebody's out after curfew. That happens all the time. Little Johnny is on a curfew imposed by the courts and he's in a group home. He doesn't come home, they call him missing. Some individuals in Nanaimo, I thought we should enter them on the system as continually reported missing, you know, if located, make sure they're not missing now. So I think there was a sense she's going to the bar, that was known, and a young girl, and she's probably out there, you know, the thought was, oh, she'll come home and not worry about it, rather than taking those initial steps to maybe make a few inquiries as to where she went and what she could, you know, what could have happened to her. And I think that could have been handled, like I say, much, much better. The call came to a general duty member, but now they're going on to night shifts and they got like 24 hours off, so then it's going to sit, right? Nobody's going to really look at it. From when reported to when we got it, I can't remember the exact timeline, but I'm going to say it's 2 or 3 days. And I think all those factors may have played into that delay.
I asked Doug to reflect on the biggest challenge facing police then and now.
When you think of it, we don't have any real physical evidence. I mean, we have the car that we examined, right? But I've explained to you before that all the evidence that came out of that car is just confirmation of what other people have told us. Yes, she was in that car, right? So, and we know that. So that's the only physical evidence we have. So it's going to take one of two things, or both. Somebody who's had that conversation, or two, by miracle, her body is discovered and there's something there that we can tie back to. And both aren't out of the realm of possibilities. It just takes the person that we're talking about to make that call and to come forward.
Was there ever any talk at the time about, because I know it's unusual, I guess, for it to happen, but for a charge to be laid without her body being
It can be done. I was involved in one murder case where that was done. In the middle of the trial, the body was actually found, but we did lay the charge, and it can be done. It takes a lot of work.
So what will it take to finally bring Lisa home?
You know, there's people out there that know something. I know that. I can say that pretty confidently. There's other people that know something, and I would urge them to come forward to the police. Don't keep that to yourself. Tell somebody. I am quite confident that he has talked to other people about it, and there's people out there that know stuff about those conversations.
Lisa Marie Young's disappearance is the case that started my journey as a true crime podcaster, and one I've become deeply and personally invested in. If you know something and you're not willing to talk to the police, talk to me. In confidence at laura@laurapalmer.ca. I'm Laura Palmer, and this is an update to Island Crimes Season 1. Where is Lisa?